Welcome to PM Ready, your guide to becoming PMP certified. This lesson is part 1 of PMP exam strategies. The objective of this lesson is to teach you some specific techniques and strategies that will help you to answer the PMP exam questions correctly and more quickly than you might otherwise, so that you will be better and faster on the actual PMP exam. Your years of experience as a project manager, leading and directing projects, and the practical skills that you've gained from that, plus all of the study that you need to do to learn all of the material of the project management body of knowledge, particularly from the PMBOK guide, will be very valuable for you on the PMP exam. However, in addition to that, it will be very beneficial for you to analyze the exam itself and to prepare for it by identifying different types of questions and how best to answer them. That way, when you get to the exam itself, you'll be able to identify these types of questions quickly and answer these questions more accurately and faster. The first key to answering these questions correctly and quickly is to make sure you always use PMI Vocabulary. Now, this shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. Any mature industry has the hallmark of being one that has standards, including standard terminology. Now, different industries and different organizations will demonstrate this. You can see from, for example, the legal profession, or the medical industry, or the accounting industry, that these have standards and mature, well-established terminologies. And so this is no exception for the project management field of study and profession. So PMI has worked very hard to come up with a standard vocabulary that it has published in the PMBOK guide, and particularly in the glossary at the end. So regardless of the experience that you may have and the terminology that you will have used in different organizations and in different industries, you need to make sure that you don't get those terms confused with the official terms from PMI. So for example, something as simple as a project charter has a well-defined meaning and content in the PMBOK guide, and you need to make sure that you always refer to it as the project charter. Other methodologies and industries may use other terms. Others that you may have seen are project brief, or a proposal, definition, a statement. Also, you shouldn't confuse this with a project initiation document. Any number of different terms that you may have been exposed to. However, you need to make sure that when you're answering these questions, you're looking for and recognizing the official PMI vocabulary. The second key is to answer questions using the official PMI answer. PMI literally wrote the standard for project management, which is an ANSI standard. So naturally, the PMP exam follows this standard. When answering questions on the exam, put yourself in the shoes of the model PMP certified project manager and provide the ideal answer, no excuses. And also consider looking at this from the perspective of large projects, where the most processes, tools, and techniques are involved. The rest of this lesson identifies several specific types of questions and provides strategies for answering them. Everything from questions that have multiple right answers, or where it looks like the right answer is not there at all. Questions where the answer hinges on making sure you catch one particular word. Questions that are very long-winded, questions that provide more information than you really need that can be confusing. Also, questions that ask you, given a scenario, what you should do next. Of course, there are several questions that involve some simple mathematics. Also in the exam, you'll find questions that deal with the terminology and will provide you as possible answers terms that are just made up, or provide you with alternatives that are easily confused. There will be questions concerning ethics, also questions that are negative or absolute, as well as some questions that involve some rather complex calculations. The third key is to choose the most precise answer. Take this question, for example. Where is the WBS, or work breakdown structure? Is it in the scope management plan, the statement of work, the project management plan, or the scope baseline? Well, let's think about this for a moment and analyze it. The scope management plan is all about how scope will be planned, so it's not going to have any of the specifics about the work breakdown structure for this particular project. So it's not A. Also, there's the statement of work. This is one of those easily confused terms. The statement of work is something that belongs with procurement, that you use with an outside vendor. It's not the project scope statement. So that is not the right answer either. That leaves us with C and D. The project management plan is the overarching document that includes all of the other management plans for all of the other knowledge areas. So that would certainly encompass the work breakdown structure as well. However, look at D. D is the scope baseline. What's in the scope baseline? The work breakdown structure. The scope baseline is part of the project management plan, but it also specifically includes the work breakdown structure, the work breakdown structure dictionary, as well as the project scope statement. So which of these two answers is correct? Well, from a certain point of view, both C and D are correct, but the most precise answer is D, the scope baseline. The fourth type of question that we'll be analyzing in this lesson is when the best answer simply isn't there. Take this one for example. Again, where is the WBS? The scope management plan, the statement of work, the project management plan, or the requirements documentation. We know from our previous example that the best answer for this is that it's in the scope baseline. However, this answer isn't here. Is it in the scope management plan? No, again, because that's the rule book for how we're going to plan scope, but it doesn't include the scope itself, so it's not there. What about the statement of work? That's part of procurement. It's the document or information that we use to contract with an outside vendor to deliver a certain scope of work for us, the procurement statement of work. So it's not B. The project management plan? Well, yeah, it's in there. It's really not the best answer. It's not the more precise answer that we're looking for in scope baseline, but yes, it is in the project management plan. For completeness, let's look at D as well. The requirements documentation. Is it there? No. The requirements documentation comes before the work breakdown structure and is one of the inputs to it, but doesn't include the work breakdown structure. So our best answer, though it isn't very precise at all, is C. Let's look at another example of a question that is missing the best answer. Which should the project manager consult regarding proposed changes? A, the sponsor, B, the project management plan, C, the PMO, or D, the change control board. Now, when answering questions like this, it's best if you think of the correct answer before you look at the possible choices. The best answer to this question is the change management plan. Because as you see these other answers, the sponsor or the PMO or the change control board, those are all answers that might be correct depending on the details of the change management plan. Each change management plan can be different. It may specify that you need to consult with the sponsor, or it may not. It may specify that you need to have a change control board, or may not. So it really depends on what's in the change management plan. However, that answer isn't here. But where is the change management plan? It's in the project management plan. So B is actually your best answer. Though if you hadn't thought of the correct answer first, you might be tempted to answer with something else, particularly the change control board. The fifth type of question is when you have multiple right answers. You may look at a question and see that it's very clear to you that Both A and C and D are all correct. So how do you choose? Well, in this case, it can be valuable to look at these answers a little more closely and ask yourself, which is the most correct most of the time? So, for example, you may see, as you analyze it more closely, that A can be correct, that C is usually correct, but that D is always correct. So ask yourself which is the most correct most of the time. Also ask yourself which of these answers is the easiest to defend. If you were asked to defend your answer, which one could you most easily defend? Which answer has the fewest or no exceptions to it? And which answer is the most complete answer? Here is an example of a question that has multiple right answers. Change requests. A, may include preventive actions. B, may include corrective actions. C, should not include preventive or corrective actions. Or D, may include preventive or corrective actions. Now, as you take a closer look at this, what's the right answer? Well, if you're too quick in going through this, you might pick one of the earlier answers because it may include preventive or corrective actions. So you might hit A and think, yes, that's true. Or you might hit B and say, oh, yep, that's true. Because they are true, but they're not as complete as the answer D, may include preventive or corrective actions. So D is the correct answer. For number 6, we look at questions that contain too much information. This example is Alyssa is managing a project to develop a new behavioral case management system for the state's Department of Health and Human Services. The project budget is $1 million. It is expected to take 6 months. 2 months into the project, the amount of money planned to be spent is $250,000. The actual amount spent is $225,000. The team is ahead of schedule and has completed what was expected to cost $260,000. What is the BAC? Now that's a lot of information. In fact, it's much more than you really need. So the key to answering these types of questions is that when you see something that's really long and has lots of detail in it, it can be very useful to go directly to the end and see what they're asking for. In this case, what is the BAC, or budget at completion, which is the same as the project budget. See, if you've gone to the end of the question first, then you can go back to the beginning and quickly scan for the project budget, and it's right there, $1 million. All of the rest of this detail is irrelevant. The 7th type of questions are negative questions. Questions that use words like not or except. So, for example, which of the following is not true? If you're not careful, you may miss that not. Hit A or B and see that those are true and pick them. But because they're true doesn't mean they're the right answer, because it said which of the following is not true. So look carefully for those negative questions and make sure you pick the correct answer, which is not true. The 8th type of question are questions that are absolutes. Absolutes are words like always, never, every, each, all, must, only. These words are dangerous because, especially in project management, you're meant to adapt all of these principles and processes to your particular project. And so absolutes are very rarely true. So when you find a question that says which of the following is true, and the answers include these absolute words, watch out for those and be careful with them. Much better are words that are not absolutes, that qualify the answer. Words like usually or typically or rarely or many or most, some, can or may. These are words that are less absolute. Now, absolutes are not always wrong. There are times when absolutes are necessary and correct answers. For example, change management. changes always need to go through the change management plan and process that have been defined. Baselines should never be changed without going through the proper change management process. Scope in particular is very likely to be changed, and it can be easy to think that a particular change is minor or trivial and that it doesn't need to go through the process. But it is important that it does, to make sure that you've addressed all of the possibilities of how this relatively minor scope change could affect the project. Another area is in definitions. There are many definitions in the terminology of PMBOK guide, and these have absolutes tied to them, such as all projects have a start and an end. That's just part of the definition, so that is an example of an absolute. Another is in how processes work. Fast tracking, for example, only works if you have tasks that can overlap, because that's what fast tracking is. It's the overlapping of tasks, so it only makes sense. Resource smoothing only works within the available float without extending the end date of the project. If you extended the end date of the project, you wouldn't call it resource smoothing. You'd call it resource leveling instead. Also, different contract types are appropriate for different situations, and so there are some absolute statements there. Ethics, of course, is another good example where certain rules apply always. Now, absolutes, on the other hand, usually don't apply in most situations, particularly those in which you're adapting the tools and techniques of the project management body of knowledge to your individual projects. So by and large, be wary of absolutes, but recognize that there are times where absolutes are correct. Number 9, complex calculations. These are calculations that are rather involved and can be time-consuming. Examples include network diagrams, tables of activity estimates, and statistical calculations. The key strategies for answering these types of questions include, first of all, looking for a shortcut. Oftentimes you'll find that by understanding the principles behind and concepts behind these types of questions, you can find a shortcut to the answer. For example, in a critical path question, keep in mind that the float on the critical path is 0, unless there is some external schedule constraint that prevents it from being 0. It may help you and allow you to avoid doing all of the calculations involved and quickly discern the correct answer. Another strategy is to draw it out. In such complex questions, it can be confusing if you don't draw a picture of it, and drawing a picture of it can bring everything into clarity. So take a moment and draw it out. And the third and perhaps most important piece of advice is that for these questions, because they're so time consuming, they can really trip you up and they can chew up too much of your time on the exam. So if you're running low on time or suspect you might be running low on time, then take your best guess and mark it for review to come back to later, rather than going through all of the calculations up front. How will you know when you're ready to take the PMP exam? How many practice exams do you need to take? And what score do you need to get on them to be sure you're ready? With the PM Ready Exam Simulator, you get a guarantee when you're ready. It also comes with lifetime access, no expiration date. Click on the link below for more information, including a free sample. PM Ready is a publication of PM Guaranteed and is based on the Project Management Institute's PMBOK guide.